The cold wind howled through the empty streets as Lisa pulled her coat tighter around her shivering body. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting long, lonely shadows on the cracked pavement. She walked with slow, heavy steps, her heart burdened by an unimaginable pain, one that never seemed to fade, no matter how many days or nights passed. Lisa had lost her son, not to illness, not to an accident. He had simply disappeared. One ordinary afternoon, he had left for school, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, his laughter lingering in the air. But he never came back. That day had shattered her world into a million pieces. And since then, she had spent every moment searching, hoping, crying. She cried when she woke up and saw his empty bed. She cried when she walked past his favorite cereal at the grocery store. She cried when she found his little shoes, still tucked neatly by the door. Every single thing reminded her of him, and every day she carried the unbearable weight of not knowing where he was, if he was safe, if he was even alive. People around her had moved on. They told her to stay strong, to accept reality. But how could she? How could a mother stop searching for her own child? The world seemed to forget him, but Lisa never would. That evening, as she wandered through the dimly lit streets, her thoughts tangled with memories. Her feet moved without direction, her mind lost in the echoes of the past. She had walked the street before, many times in fact, stopping to pace missing posters on lampposts, begging strangers to keep an eye out. But the posters had long been torn down or covered by new ones. Her son's face, once plastered everywhere, had slowly faded from public view. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her pocket, feeling the worn-out piece of paper she carried every day, a crumpled photo of her son, his bright eyes full of life, his smile so pure. She traced the edges of the picture with her thumb, whispering his name like a prayer. And then, something strange happened. A soft voice, almost like a whisper in the wind, caught her attention. "Mom!" Lisa froze. Her breath hitched. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She turned her head, scanning the street, her eyes wide with disbelief. Was it real? Had she imagined it? There, standing at the corner, was a boy. His figure was shadowed under the flickering streetlight, his face obscured by the night. He was just standing there, unmoving. Lisa's pulse raced as she took a step forward. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice breaking, her hands trembling. The boy didn't move. He just stood there watching. Lisa felt her knees grow weak. Could it really be him? After all these years, she took another step, her eyes desperately searching for his face, for any sign that this was real. And then, the boy turned and ran. Lisa's heart dropped. Without thinking, she ran after him, her legs moving faster than they ever had before. She dodged past strangers, barely noticing the confused stares, the honking cars, the flashing neon signs around her. Nothing mattered, only him. "Wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, stop!" But the boy didn't stop. He darted through the streets like a ghost, slipping into the darkness. Lisa pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her lungs, the tears blurring her vision. She had to catch him. She had to know the truth. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, vanished into the night. Lisa stumbled to a stop, gasping for air, her hands clutching her chest. She spun around wildly, searching every shadow, every alleyway, every doorway. But there was nothing, no sign of him. Had she imagined it? Had grief finally driven her mad? Or was it real? Lisa stood there, frozen in place, as the weight of uncertainty crashed down on her once again. But one thing was certain, she had seen him, and if he was out there, somewhere, then she would never stop looking. Lisa stood in the middle of the street, her chest rising and falling, in sharp, uneven breaths. The world around her felt distant. The hum of traffic, the chatter of strangers, the neon lights flickering above. It all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the shadowy figure of the boy who had just disappeared. Had it really been Ethan? Or was her mind playing cruel tricks on her again? She had thought she'd seen him before, on a crowded subway, in a passing car, among a group of school children crossing the road. Each time, she had chased after him, only to find herself standing alone, staring at someone else's face. But this time, it had felt different. There was something in the way he stood there, in the way he ran. It was familiar. It was Ethan. She was sure of it. Lisa wiped at the tears streaming down her cheeks and turned in every direction, searching for any sign of him. But the street was empty now. Just a few people walking by, paying her no attention. A lump formed in her throat as hopelessness threatened to take over, but she forced herself to stay calm. If he was out there, she would find him. She needed help. Lisa pulled out her phone and dialed the one person who had never stopped believing her. Detective James Carter. He was the only officer who hadn't dismissed her as a grieving mother, who refused to accept the truth. Lisa. His voice was cautious, but kind. He knew she wouldn't call unless something serious had happened. I saw him, she whispered, her voice shaking. I swear, James. I saw Ethan. There was a pause. Then his voice came through, steady but urgent. Where? Lisa looked around, trying to get her bearings. Near 5th and Main. He was standing under a streetlight. And then he ran. I chased him, but he disappeared. Stay there, James said. I'm on my way. Lisa ended the call and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop her body from trembling. The minutes felt like hours. But soon, James' car pulled up beside her. He stepped out, his eyes scanning the street before landing on her. Tell me everything, he said. Lisa recounted every detail, from the moment she heard the whisper to the way the boy ran. James listened intently, nodding as he took notes. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. I believe you, Lisa, he said. If you saw him, we'll find him. But we need to be smart about this. If he ran, there's a reason. Either he's scared or someone doesn't want him to be found. Lisa's stomach twisted. That thought had haunted her for years. If Ethan was still out there, why hadn't he come home? Had someone taken him? Was he in danger? We'll check surveillance cameras in the area, James continued. Maybe we can track where he went. Hope flickered inside Lisa. This time, she wasn't just chasing shadows. There was proof. Cameras. Witnesses. She wasn't alone in this search. Anymore. That night, Lisa barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. The face she had missed for so long. The fear in his eyes. The way he ran. What if he was afraid of her? What if he didn't recognize her anymore? The thought was unbearable. The next morning, James called with news. We found footage, he said. Meet me at the station. Lisa's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, racing to the police station. The moment she arrived, James led her to a small room with a monitor. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A boy stood under the streetlight, his hands tucked into his hoodie. Lisa leaned forward, her heart pounding. It was him. She was sure of it. Then, she saw herself enter the frame, calling out to him. The boy turned his head slightly, just enough for the camera to catch his face. Lisa gasped. Even through the poor quality, she could see it. The familiar features, the same shape of his eyes. Tears blurred her vision as she watched him turn and run. The camera followed him for a few seconds before he disappeared around a corner. "Pause it," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. James paused the video. Lisa stared at the screen, her fingers tracing the outline of her son's face. He was older now, taller, his hair slightly longer. But it was him. "Where did he go?" she asked, her voice filled with desperate hope. James rewound the footage, tracing the boy's path. "He ran into this alley," he said, pointing. "There's another camera at the next street, but he never came out the other side." Lisa's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" James frowned. "It means either he's hiding, or someone took him before he could get away." A chill ran down Lisa's spine. The idea that someone had been watching, waiting, ready to snatch Ethan away before she could reach him, it made her feel sick. James stood up. "We need to check that alley." Lisa didn't hesitate. "Let's go." Minutes later, they arrived at the alley where Ethan had vanished. It was narrow and dark, the walls covered in graffiti. Lisa's heart pounded as she took a step forward, scanning every shadow, every doorway. Then, something caught her eye. A small object, half buried in the dirt near the wall. She bent down, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. It was a keychain, a familiar one. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. It was Ethan's. She had given it to him on his 8th birthday, a small silver pendant in the shape of a star. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched it to her chest. He had been here. He had dropped this. He was close. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is proof, Lisa. We're getting closer." Lisa nodded, determination burning in her eyes. She wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when she was finally on the brink of finding her son. Lisa gripped the small silver keychain in her hand, her knuckles turning white. It was solid proof. Ethan had been here. He had dropped this. Maybe as a sign. Maybe as a desperate cry for help. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned to James, her eyes wild with urgency. "He was here," she whispered, more to herself than to him. James nodded, scanning the dark alley. "And he didn't come out the other side. That means there's another way out. Or someone took him before he could escape." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The thought of someone dragging Ethan away just moments before she could reach him was unbearable. She stepped forward, her eyes darting around, searching for anything else. Then she noticed it. A rusted metal door at the far end of the alley, slightly ajar. She ran toward it, pushing it open with trembling hands. The door creaked, revealing a dimly lit staircase leading downward. The air was damp, thick with the scent of mold and dust. Lisa hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. James followed close behind, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The stairs led to an underground corridor, old and forgotten, as if it had been abandoned. For years, their footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. Then, a noise, a faint shuffle, a breath. Someone was here. Lisa's pulse quickened. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice barely more than a whisper. Silence. She took another step forward, and then she saw him, a small figure huddled in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest. His clothes were worn, his hair longer than she remembered. But those eyes she had memorized since the day he was born, looked up at her with a mix of fear and recognition. Lisa felt her entire world shift. "Ethan!" she gasped, falling to her knees. "Oh my God! Ethan, it's me!" For a moment, he didn't move. His body was tense, like he wasn't sure if he should trust what he was seeing. Lisa's hands shook as she reached out, afraid he would disappear if she moved too fast. "It's okay, baby. I'm here. I found you." Tears welled in his eyes. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Then slowly, he moved, and in the next second, he was in her arms. Lisa sobbed as she held him, her fingers running through his hair, her body shaking from the sheer relief of having him back. He was thin, too thin. He clung to her with a desperation that shattered her heart. James stepped back, giving them a moment, but his eyes stayed alert. "Ethan," he said gently, "who brought you here?" Ethan tensed in Lisa's arms. She felt him stiffen, his fingers gripping her jacket. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Ethan swallowed hard before whispering, "They're coming back." Lisa's blood ran cold. James immediately straightened, his hand moving to his holster. "We need to go, now." Lisa pulled Ethan to his feet, keeping him close. Together, they hurried, back up the stairs, through the alley, and into the open street. The cold night air hit them, but Lisa didn't care. She had him. He was real. He was alive. James led them quickly to his car, and within moments, they were driving away, leaving the dark alley behind. Lisa never let go of Ethan's hand, afraid that if she did, she would lose him again. Ethan was quiet on the ride, his small fingers gripping the keychain she had found. Lisa watched him, memorizing every detail of his face. He had grown, but he was still her little boy. As they neared the police station, Ethan finally spoke. "I tried to find you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they never let me." Lisa's heart clenched. She didn't push him to say more. She knew he would tell his story when he was ready. All that mattered was that he was here, that he was safe. That night, after hours of questions, after endless phone calls, after every ounce of fear and pain had finally settled into reality, Lisa sat beside Ethan in a quiet room at the station, holding his hand as he drifted to sleep. For the first time in years, she felt whole again. The pain of the past would never fully fade, and the scars of what Ethan had been through would take time to heal, but she had him back. And that was enough. As she watched her son sleep, his chest rising and falling in steady breaths, Lisa whispered a silent promise. She would never let him go again.